That your IIU background is there now. If you want, you can just make that thing.
You can start soon.
Yeah. Myself, Professor Raghvendra, basically biodiversity scientist, working on biodiversity documentation since last 25 years. I completed my post-graduation life science, did my research on biodiversity as an academician from the last 25 years, Karnataka, India. I'm very much thankful to the organizer to give me an opportunity to interact the session with you. Let me start with my today's talk is biodiversity and conservation, which is needed the present scenario to be discussed with you all. Let us start with my session now. My best wishes to International Internship University for giving a wonderful opportunity to the young scientist. Let us start with today's talk. Well, friends, good evening to all. The time allotted me is 45 minutes. Biodiversity. You aware the term, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity, yeah, by today's, the main content distribution of biodiversity and the balance of nature, benefits of biodiversity, threat to the biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity, biodiversity of India, convention on the biodiversity. Yeah, it concludes in the reference. The term biodiversity, it was first coined by the Walter G. Rosen in 1986. The biosphere that comprises of a complex collection of innumerable organisms known as the biodiversity, which constitute the vital life support for the survival of human race. Biological diversity, the shortly abbreviated as biodiversity, that represents the sum total of various life forms, unicellular, fungi, protozoa, bacteria, multicellular organisms like plants, fishes, mammals at various biological levels, including the genes, habitats, and the ecosystem. Yeah, right. Biodiversity, what does bio means? Very simple term. Bio means life. What does biodiversity means? Diversity, variety. See, now bio means life. Diversity, variety. What are the main concept and types of biodiversity? Biodiversity is the variety of life forms on Earth and the essential interdependence of all living things. Biodiversity is the variety of all life forms on the Earth and the essential interdependence of all living things. As defined in the Convention on Biological Diversity signed at Rio de Janeiro and Brazil in 1992 by 154 countries. The biodiversity that defined as the variability among the living organisms from all the sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems and the ecological complexes of which the area part in this include the diversity within the species, between the species and the ecosystem. But very simple language, variety and variability among the living organisms and ecological complexes in which they occur is known as the biodiversity again. The same definition which is given in the Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992 by 154 countries. Just to go on for the, according to IUCN in 1998, the variety and variability of species of their population, the variety of species of their life forms, the diversity of the complex association with the species with their interaction and their ecological process which influences perform. This is IUCN in 1998. Wonderful definition given by the IUCN. The variety and the variability of species of their population, the variety of species of their life forms, the diversity of the complex association with species with their interaction and their ecological process which influence perform. Yeah, it's just a deviation from the Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in 1992, the definition of biodiversity, same aspect which we are covered here. Yeah. Now turn to the, what are the types of biodiversity, or we are going to give the steps of biodiversity. Simple. Diversity of species, diversity of species, diversity of ecosystem, diversity of genes.
Please open your microphones here.
Yeah, it's open.
Okay.
Hearing?
Yes, now yes.
Now, okay, no, right. No. Some your organizer is she's waiting for to join again. Please convey. There are three types of the biodiversity: diversity of species, diversity of ecosystem, diversity of genes. I will repeat again. There are three types of the biodiversity: diversity of species, diversity of ecosystem, diversity of genes. Yeah, species, ecosystem, and the genes. Yeah, how the distribution of biodiversity, very important. See, the distribution of biodiversity, very important concept. That is, flora and fauna diversity depends on climate, attitude, soil, presence of other species. Most of the biodiversity concentrated in tropical region. Distribution of biodiversity, flora and fauna diversity that depends climate, attitude, soil, presence of the other species. Most of the biodiversity concentrated in tropical region. Biodiversity hotspot. B noted the point. A region with high biodiversity with most of species being endemic. A region with high biodiversity with most of species being endemic. India have two biodiversity hotspots, East Himalayan region and the Western Ghat. I'm proud to be say I'm the part of the Western Ghat. I am in the belt of the Western Ghat. I'm in the belt of the Western Ghat. I did my biodiversity documentation in the Western Ghat belt. A region with high biodiversity with most of species being endemic. India have the two biodiversity hotspots, East Himalayan region and the Western Ghat. Yeah. Why we are bothered about biodiversity? Biodiversity and the balance of nature. Tropical level, that is, elimination of species from trophic level can cause destruction of ecosystem as well as the biodiversity. See, beautiful term. trophic level, elimination of species from trophic level can cause the destruction of ecosystem as well as biodiversity. Just take the best example, plant in the forest, depends deer, again the lion. See, trophic level, plants in the forest, deer and the lion. This is the one given the example about the trophic level. Trophic level, elimination of species from trophic level can cause the destruction of ecosystem as well as biodiversity. Plants in the forest, deer and the lion. Complex ecosystem. Yeah, it is again a debatable point to be noted here. Complex ecosystem, in a complicated ecosystem having the several trophical levels, that is loss of one or more species do not cause any serious problem, cause the alternative available. Trophic level, elimination of the species from the trophic level can cause the destruction of ecosystem. Given the example, plants in the forest, deer and lion. Complex ecosystem, in a complicated ecosystem having the several tropical level, loss of one or more species do not cause any serious problem because the alternate available. One more important point, that is keystone species. Keystone species, that is the loss or addition of species cause detectable changes in ecosystem rates. Keystone species, loss or additions of species cause detectable changes in ecosystem rate, that is species make unique contribution to ecosystem functioning. That is niche complementary, that is difference among the species in their requirements for different resources will cause the complementary interactions so that species could obtain the more resources. Species could obtain more resources. Please just go through again. Very, very important discussion I'm having with you. Biodiversity and the balance of nature. Trophic level, elimination of species from trophic level can cause the destruction of ecosystem as well as the biodiversity. Plants in the forest, deer in the land. Complex ecosystem. It's in a complicated ecosystem having the several tropical level, loss of the one or more species do not cause any serious problems, cause the alternative available. Keystone species, that is loss or addition of species causes the detectable changes in ecosystem rates, that is the species make unique contribution to ecosystem functioning. It's a complementary difference among the species in the requirements for different resources will cause the complementary interaction so that species could obtain the more resources. Interesting point to be noted. Yeah, facilitation and the mutualism. Plants may also benefit from their neighbors through the amelioration of the physical and the biotic environment. See, facilitation and mutualism. Plants may also benefit from their neighbors through amelioration of the physical and biotic environment. Portfolio effect. What this is, the species richness that increases the temporal stability of the entire community while the biomass is stabilized. Biomass is stabilized. That is insurance of the hypothesis. Biodiversity that buffers ecosystem against the environmental changes such as the global warming. Note on the point. See, facilitation and mutualism. Plants may also benefit from their neighbors through amelioration of the physical and biotic environment. Portfolio effect. Species richness increases the temporal stability of the entire community while the biomass is stabilized. Insurance hypothesis. Biodiversity buffers the ecosystem against the environmental changes such as the global warming. Yeah, well, friends. Now you are aware with the introductory talk about the biodiversity. What is biodiversity? What are the stages of biodiversity? Then how the biodiversity can be explained by different experts. Why you are bothered about biodiversity? Yeah. What are the main benefits of biodiversity? Yeah. Just for uh, my convenience, it can be divided into consumptive value. Biodiversity have its own value. Number one, consumptive value. That is food and the drinks. That is from biodiversity. Fuel. That is from biodiversity. Medicine. That is from biodiversity. Crop varieties. That is from biodiversity. Industrial material. That is from biodiversity. These are all we categorized under the consumptive value. Food and the drink, fuel, medicine, crop varieties, industrial material. Yeah, you go for the non-consumptive value. Non-consumptive value, recreation, education and the research, traditional value. These are all coming under the categorizing of the consumptive value. Benefits of biodiversity, consumptive value, the food and the drink, fuel, medicine, crop varieties, industrial material, whereas the non-consumptive value is the recreation, education and the research, traditional value. Right? Yeah. Ecological services. Biodiversity provides the ecological service. Very, very important. Biodiversity that provides the ecological services in the sense which balance the nature. Balance of the nature is by the biodiversity. Biological productivity is by the biodiversity. Regulation of the climate is by the biodiversity. Degradation of the waste is by the biodiversity. Cleaning of air and water by the biodiversity. Cycling of the nutrients is by biodiversity. Control of potential pest and disease causing the species is by biodiversity. Detoxification of the soil and the sedimentation is by biodiversity. Stabilization of the land against the erosion is by biodiversity. Carbon sequestration and the global climatic change is by biodiversity. Maintenance of the soil fertility. See, go on listing. It's n number. If you give ecological service with n number, just for the my convenience, just I'm classifying here. Ecological service is very, very important. See, ecological services, go through it one by one. Very, very important. I have no time to be elaborate you people, just have the nature. Followed. See, benefits of biodiversity, just for the short. Consumptive value, food and the drink. No need to explanation. Fuel, yeah, it's by the biodiversity. Medicine is by the biodiversity. Crop varieties, that is better crop varieties is by the biodiversity. Industrial material is by the biodiversity. Non-consumptive value is recreation and education, research, traditional value, very, very important. Recreation, no need to explain you people. If you enjoy the nature, you will get the recreation. Education, the research, traditional value important. See, ecological service is very, very important. See, the importance of biodiversity is ecological service. That is the balancing of the nature, biological productivity. Okay. Regulation of the climate, degradation of the waste, cleaning of the air and the water, cycling of the nutrients, control of the potential of the pest and the disease causing species, detoxification of the soil and the sediments, stabilization of the land against the erosion, carbon sequestration in the global climatic change, maintenance of soil fertility. Yeah, please. What are the threats to the biodiversity? Number one, natural causes. That is the narrow geographical area. Narrow geographical area is threat to the biodiversity. Low population, low breeding rate, natural disasters. See, threats to the biodiversity, natural causes, narrow geographical area, low population, low breeding rate, natural disasters. Anthropogenic causes. Anthropogenic causes, habitat modification, over exploitation of the selected species, innovation by the exotic species. Narrow geographical area, low population, low breeding rate, natural disasters, anthropogenic causes, habitat modification, over exploitation of the selected species, innovation by the exotic species. Very, 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 very important point to be noted here. Pollution, hunting, global warming and the climate change, agriculture, domino effect, threat to the biological diversity again. See, narrow geographical area, low population, low breeding rate, natural disasters, anthropogenic causes, habitat modification, over exploitation of the selected species, innovation by exotic species, pollution, hunting, global warming, climatic change, agriculture, domino effect. See, what are the recent issues that to be noted? The last 30 minutes we are discussing about biodiversity. Recent issues on biodiversity is some 75% of the genetic diversity of the crop plants being lost in the first century. The interesting point to be noted here. Some 75% of the genetic diversity of crop plants being lost in the first century. Some scientists estimated that as many as 3 species per hour are going extinct. 20,000 extinction occur each year. Noted the point. Very alarming point to be discussing with you is some 75% of the genetic diversity of crop plants be lost in the first century. Some scientists estimate that as many as 3 species per hour are going extinct. 20,000 extinctions occur each year. Roughly 1/3 of the world's coral reef system now destroyed or highly degraded. About 24% of the mammals, 12% of the bird species are currently considered to be the globally threatened. Globally threatened. 50% of the world wetlands have been drained, and populations of inland water and the wetland species have declined by 50% between 1970 to 1999. See, just once review the concept here. Very important. Some 75% of the genetic diversity of the crop plant lost in the first century. Some scientists estimate that as many as 3 species per hour are going to be extinct, and 20,000 extinctions occur each year. Roughly 1/3 of the world coral reef systems have been destroyed or highly degraded. About 24% of the mammals and 12% of the bird species are currently considered to be globally threatened. More than 50% of the world wetlands have been drained. The population of the inland water and the wetland species have declined by 50% between 1970 to 1999. Yeah, I will take this toss again the different view. Conservation of biodiversity. Conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity inventories. Conservation of biodiversity in protected habitats. In situ conservation. Ex situ conservation. Seed bank. Gene bank. Pollen bank. DNA bank. Conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity inventories. Conserving the biodiversity and protected habitats, in situ conservation, ex situ conservation, seed bank, gene bank, pollen bank, DNA, and okay, resortation of biodiversity, importing the environmental education. How will conserve? How will conserve? See, these are the methods. Biodiversity inventories, conserving the biodiversity in protected habitats, in situ conservation, ex situ conservation, seed bank, gene bank, pollen bank, DNA bank, resortation of biodiversity, importing environmental education, enacting, strengthening, and enforcing the environmental legislation. Yeah, population control, reviewing of the agricultural practice, controlling urbanization, conservation through biotechnology. Conservation through biotechnology. Please, yeah. Biodiversity conservation. See, in situ conservation. I will explain you it again. I will take it different task. In situ conservation, that is the sacred groves and the lakes. Biosphere reserves, that is terrestrial and the marine. National park, wildlife sanctuaries, or go through the ex situ conservation. Sacred plant home garden, seed bank, gene bank, cryopreservation, botanical garden, zoological garden, area, zoological garden, aquaria, biodiversity. We will take this task again. See, just biodiversity in India, just for a rough idea, it was very long back. I taken the statistics. Category mammals, number of Indian species is 386. Evaluated is 59. Species threatened in India is 41%. Birds 1219. No evaluation. Species threatened is 7%. Reptiles 495. Whereas the percentage of Indian species evaluated is 73. Whereas the species threatened in India is 46%. Amphibians, yeah, number of Indian species is 207. Percentage of the Indian species evaluated is 79. Species threatened in India is 57%. Freshwater fish, number of Indian species is 700. Percentage of the Indian species evaluated is 46. Species threatened in India is 70%. 70%. Yeah, this is just for reviewing it. Just go through the number, you get the idea. What the conventions? Conventions, the first convention on biodiversity organized in Rio de Janeiro, capital of Brazil, from June 5th to 16, 1992, named as the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, better known as the Rio Summit, to maintain the ecological balance and enrich biodiversity. The agreement on biodiversity signed by 150 countries, including the 3 programs to ensure the conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of biodiversity, rational and equitable share of profit to accrue from use of genetic resources. The second convention, organized in Johannesburg in 2002, called World Summit on Sustainable Development, where the biodiversity and sustainable ecosystem management was the issue. Management was the issue. The international conference held on the biodiversity relation to the food and human security in a, yeah, warming the plant 15 to 17 2010 in Chennai. International conferences on wildlife and biodiversity conservation held in 3 to 5 June 2010 at Dalak, Srinagar, Kashmir. Indian Biodiversity Congress and Indian Biodiversity Expo 17 to 31st December at Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Yeah, Indian Biodiversity Congress. Yeah, what the conclusion now, my talk? Biodiversity is our life. Biodiversity is our life. If the biodiversity got lost at this rate, then in near future, the survival of the human being will be threatened. So it is our moral duty to conserve biodiversity as well our environment. Long-term maintenance of the species and their management requires cooperative effort across the entire landscape. Biodiversity should be dealt with the scale of habitats or ecosystem rather than at species level. Rather than at species level. See, biodiversity is our life. If the biodiversity is got lost at this rate, then in near future, the survival of the human being will be threatened. So it is our moral duty to conserve biodiversity as well as our environment. Long-term maintenance of species and their management requires cooperative efforts across entire landscapes. Biodiversity should be dealt with the scale of habitats or ecosystem rather than at species level. Rather than at species level. Very, very important concluding reference. Yeah, just biodiversity and this conservation. 2 minutes I want to share with you. What is the significance of biodiversity? We already aware that biodiversity that protect the fresh air, clean water, and productive land. No need to again. Biodiversity, I explained you very well. What is biodiversity? Significance of biodiversity, I already explained you what is significance. Biodiversity consider 3 different level I discussed with you: genetic, species, and ecosystem. 3 different level: genetic, species, ecosystem discussed. Genetic diversity. What is genetic diversity within individuals? Yeah, species, a discrete group of organisms, whereas ecosystem, we already discussed right now. Conservation of biodiversity. 2 minutes because my talk is another way to be included this. That is, conservation on refers to management of human activities in the environment so that does not lead to habitual destruction and loss of biodiversity. To preserve and protect the species of their habitat, to use the species and ecosystem sustainably without exploiting them, the recreation of natural forests, sanctuaries, biosphere, reserves, to preserve flora and fauna, conservation of genetic biodiversity by establishment of the zoo, botanical garden, nurseries, proper planning of land use and other natural resources affecting the biodiversity by prohibiting of hunting, poaching of animals, fishing, etc., beyond the productive capacity of ecosystem. Interesting. There are two approaches of biodiversity conservation. In situ, within the habitat. This is achieved by protection of wild flora and fauna in nature itself. Biosphere reserve is the best example. National park, sanctuaries reserve, forest. Ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation outside the habitat. This is done by establishing the gene bank, seed bank, zoo, botanical garden, yeah, culture, etc. There are two approaches of biodiversity conservation: in situ, ex situ. Explained you. In situ, biosphere, national park, wildlife sanctuary, sacred forest causes, botanical garden, zoo, seed are the pollen banks, gene bank, tissue culture, ex situ conservation. In situ conservation, national park is the best example. A national park is an area which is strictly reserved for the betterment of the wildlife and where the activities like forestry, grazing on cultivation for not permitted in the forest, even the private ownership rights are not allowed. Their boundaries are well marked and is circumscribed. They are usually small reserves spreading in the area of 100 square kilometer to 500 square kilometer. National park, the emphasis is on the preservation of single plant or the animal species. In situ conservation, wildlife sanctuaries take the best example. Okay, a sanctuary is a protected area which is reserved for the conservation of only animals and the human activities like harvesting of the timber, collection, minor forest product, and the private ownership of rights and allowed as well as they do not interfere with well-being of animals. Boundaries of the sanctuaries are not well defined and controlled biotic interference is permitted by tourist activity. In situ conservation, biosphere reserves. It is a special category of protected area where the human populations also forms a part of the system. They are large protected area of usually more than 5,000 square kilometer. Biosphere reserves, core, buffer, and transition zone. In situ sacred forest area. India has a history of religious, cultural traditions that emphasize the productions of nature. In many cultures, tracts of the forest were set aside. The airy trees and the wildlife within the venerated and genetic total productions. Exit to seed gene banks, tissue culture bank, exit to conservation, botanical gardens, zoological gardens. Thank you, one and all. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, friends, from this, I conclude my session. Hello. Hello.